Thank you, Josh, and thanks to the Theosophical Society for hosting me. I love this program, and I'm especially excited to share it with a group that is so broad-minded. Thank you for taking the time to gather today. I know there's a lot going on because of the holidays. So we're going to take a deep dive today into the topic of light shining in the darkness and how it's represented in Christian nativity images in fine art. And my aim is to go deep and consider the origins of night nativity paintings. You see them showing up on your Christmas cards all the time. And I think it's a really fun thing to have the backstory on them. Uh, so we're going to reflect on the meaning of light, on revelation, spirituality, what it means to be a mystic, and the birth of consciousness. We'll be looking at a lot of slides. After considering light and its context in world religions, we'll focus on one of the most famous female visionaries of the Middle Ages and how her mystic, light-filled visions led to an innovative representation of Christ's nativity in Renaissance painting. So the program's grounded in art history, but it connects to a whole lot more. Regarding my personal angle and where I'm coming from, I take a wide point of view, both in terms of art. I have training and experience as a practicing artist, art historian, and curator, and also a wide view in terms of spirituality. I'm grounded in the Catholic tradition, but I've studied Buddhism at length, and I believe in the soul's journey through rounds of reincarnation. So with that, I'd like to start our slides. Theosophy especially appeals to me because it supports the idea that all religions contain a portion of the larger truth. These days, I'm exploring mystical Christianity while integrating and honoring human reality. And I'm especially interested in connecting people to visual art and how images can offer us meaning and help sustain us, not only aesthetically, but also spiritually. I know that the Christian source of this material might be challenging, and with good reason, but there's a treasure house of Christian imagery that is really beautiful and that points to or can be interpreted to point to the universal. And that's what I care about, the universal. So that's where we're headed. I hope this program opens doors for you in how visual art can inspire and support spiritual consciousness, no matter what beliefs you may personally hold. So this is the time of year when the nights are the longest and we experience increased darkness. We live in faith that light will eventually return and that spring will come. In the meantime, our world is stripped of the dispensable. Trees, bare of their leaves, reveal their essential structure to us. It's a spiritually potent time of year because we're called to slow down, look within, and acknowledge what's really important. In sacred art, we'll be focusing on the appearance of light in darkness. There was this transformative conceptual shift in paintings of the Nativity that was the result of a mystic channeling the divine. So light, the divine, and mysticism are very connected in our story today. From religious scriptures to New Age thought, there are innumerable references to this intersection. Statements like from the Quran, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. Or in Theosophy, light is considered not just a physical phenomenon, but a divine and universal principle that permeates the entire cosmos. representing a spiritual essence that can be accessed through inner development, acting as a force for transformation, healing, and spiritual awakening within individuals. In the Judeo-Christian story of creation, the spiritual stream that we're focusing on today, light is the very first result of God's creative acts. In Genesis, it reads, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So there's incredible power associated with light. It's a form of energy that travels as electromagnetic waves, and it's the fastest thing in the universe. Light has a much bigger presence than we can easily perceive. So there's an element of mystery and profundity connected to light. Light reveals, but visible light is just a small part of the types of light that reach us from the sun and other parts of the universe. There are energetic streams of cosmic light, like ultraviolet and infrared light, that are present, but impossible for us to see. Likewise, prisms show us that hidden within white light are all the colors of the rainbow. As human beings, we're naturally drawn to the light. Our eyes aim, focus on, and track light. Light orients us in the three-dimensional world, helping us to perceive, locate ourselves in space, and make our way in the world. Light wakes us up physically, and it guides us through our daily circadian rhythms. It warms us and enables people to be happy and healthy. Light is essential for sustaining life on Earth. It nourishes us, for without light, plants couldn't grow. On top of all that, light is also fundamental to our understanding of spirit. In the narrative of religious symbolism, light serves as a profound metaphor for ideas about spiritual life. It's as integral to our spiritual life as it is to our biological life. Consider the language for a spiritual insight and understanding and attainment. It's full of references to experiencing light, from words like clarification and revelation, to seeing the light, to illumination and enlightenment. So as we go forward, I invite you to relate to light references in this program, whether verbal or visual, in whatever way feels authentic to your own self. Just because nativity paintings tell a Christian story doesn't mean that you have to be a Christian to engage with the images. Substitute any spiritual framework resonant with light that works for you. So while we have the slide on view, consider what framework, what source makes you feel blessed and safe and protected by the presence of light. What brings grace to your life? So let's just take a couple of minutes to silently reflect on what the symbol of light means spiritually for each of us. Thank you. We're going to come back to this topic near the end of the program. So at this point, we'll move on. Light in world cultures and sacred art. The importance of light has been affirmed throughout world cultures and in a wide variety of spiritual traditions. They show up all over, and I have limited time today. So we're just going to quickly scan a couple of examples through sacred art, and they may come from unfamiliar cultures, but don't let that get in your way. I just encourage you to meet them one-on-one with a fresh mind. Let's take ancient Egypt, the preeminent civilization of the Mediterranean world for almost 30 centuries. Its art represents light in a variety of ways and contexts. One of the oldest and perhaps most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon is Ra. As the first and ruling god, he's the god of creation and is strongly linked with the sun and its life-giving transformative powers that enable growth. On the left, you see Ra curled up in his form of divine child shown within the sun. He's flanked by the eyes and protective wings of his mother. And on the right, we have Ra again, shown as an adult. His identification this time with light is emphasized by a solar disk atop his head. And that solar disk motif shows up over and over again in Egyptian art for other deities besides Ra. It's a very common motif. In ancient Greek and also Roman religion and mythology, there are a number of gods who personify the sun and light. The god Helios is one of the most ancient of the Greek gods, sometimes called the Shining. He was seen as a personification of the sun. Similar to the Egyptian god Ra, Helios was born, well, I should say reborn, at dawn every morning and over the course of the day traveled through the sky from east to west, much like the sun. Halos, look at his head and you'll see a form of a halo. It also looks like a sunburst. Halos were used in the art of ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Asia before the arrival of Christianity. So it's not a Christian invention. Halos were being used long before that. Helios is a mighty god of life and creation. He is often depicted in art as a handsome young man with a radiant crown representing the luminous and shining disk of the sun. In Buddhism, light represents truth, liberation, the transcendence of illusion, and the experience of pure being. These Japanese sculptures show Amida Nyorai, the Buddha of infinite light, Light. He's the principal deity of Pure Land Buddhism. At the time of one's death, Amida Nyorai descends from his Western paradise with two attendants to greet you, which is what's happening there in the right slide. You see him with his two attendants. Now notice on the left how the entire sculpture is covered in gold. Gilding is a very effective way of representing light, since metallic gold catches the light and reflects it back to the viewer. And light is also represented in this sculpture by the concentric curved lines encircling the Buddha's head and body, and also the many little spirals that emanate out from there. On the right, the sculpture of Amida has a dramatic golden halo from which you have these long lines radiating, representing the flow of light. Turning now to Islam, Out of a concern about idolatry, Sunni Islam doesn't widely support visual representations of the prophets. Sometimes Muhammad is simply represented as a flame. But there are exceptions in Shia Islam and the art of Persia, or current day Iran, in their manuscript illuminations, as you see here. So this is quite exceptional in terms of Islam and visual art. On the left is a painted manuscript illumination showing Muhammad's ascent to heaven during his famous night journey, an event Muslims regard as their holy night. He rode on a supernatural creature. He following the archangel Gabriel, which you see on the left, beautiful wings there. He followed Gabriel to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And notice the flames of light that surrounds Muhammad as he travels through the starry sky. The scene on the right continues the story of Muhammad's night journey. Having reached Jerusalem, he leads Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others in prayer. And light in the form of flames rises from all of them, although Muhammad's figure is completely surrounded in light. The representation of radiant light surrounding a sacred figure in a full body, you could call it a halo or a glory. There's a number of terms for it, but in art history, the common term is mandorla, which is an Italian term that means amen. And I think they picked that term because the shape of it, when you put light around a body, is sort of an oblong shape, as you see on the right here. So these are two examples of Christian devotional art. On the left is an icon showing Christ's transfiguration, when according to the Gospels, his true divinity became apparent. As the story goes, Christ took his disciples, Peter, James, and John, with him up a mountain, and there he prayed. And while this was happening, Christ's divine nature was revealed, and it was revealed through the expression of light. He appeared in all his spiritual glory. His body was transfigured in a light that was brighter than the sun. And the brilliance of the light bedazzled his disciples, who collapse in our icon here in the foreground. They're overwhelmed by this vision. I think the fellow in the center, that may be John, is holding his hand to his eyes because it hurts so much, this intense light. Now, the image on the right shows the Virgin of Guadalupe, which records a miraculous apparition. That's a non-physical spiritual appearance of the Virgin Mary that occurred in Mexico in 1531. The rays of light surrounding Mary form an intrinsic part of this image. It may be one of the best known representations of a mandorla in Christian art. And I think it feels like an active blessing when we behold the presence of that light. Here are two more examples of intense spiritual light radiating from holy figures. They're both from Christianity, but I'm sure you could easily find examples like this in traditions like Hinduism. Now, addressing the image on the left, apparitions of the Virgin Mary. Virgin of Guadalupe is not the only apparition. The apparitions continue to this day. There are hundreds of them. And this image on the left records one of them that occurred from 1968 to 71. She appeared at night, hovering over the roof of a large Egyptian Orthodox Christian church in the suburbs of Cairo. And Mary reappeared in that same place 2 or 3 times a week over a period of about 3 years. This apparition was witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people, including the president of Egypt, and was photographed by Egyptian newspapers. and television. And that's what you see here, a photograph of the apparition, a light body that is actively radiating light also. The image on the right depicts an event in the life of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, the wonder worker. He was a saint highly revered in the Russian Orthodox Christian faith, and still is. He was a monk who lived a humble and solitary life of prayer in a log cabin in the woods for about 25 years. In 1831, a disciple of his, Nicholas Motovilov, had a remarkable encounter with Seraphim. Seraphim was explaining Christ's transfiguration and the radiance that can occur because of divine grace. But Nicholas was having a hard time understanding until Seraphim himself emanated a blinding light to exemplify what he was talking about. And Nicholas was completely overwhelmed. He could not look. He turned his head away. The light was so intense. And thankfully, he recorded this unforgettable experience in great detail in his diary, which is a fascinating read. I'll mention one other path of spiritual revelation that involves light, that of near-death experiencers. These days, there are numerous examples of people physically dying and visiting the other side before being resuscitated. And one of the reasons this is happening is because um, they're able to assist people with cardiac arrest in ways they never could before. Anyway, these near-death experiencers describe traveling down a long, dark tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, there's a blinding white light. With the light comes a profound sense of peace and calmness and utter joy. It's a common part of the near-death experience. And having experienced the light, a spiritual transformation occurs. For when these individuals are revived, they come back with a whole different set of values. They do not fear death anymore. They're more altruistic and less materialistic. They're more spiritual, valuing love and wisdom over anything. So it's a fascinating example of the transformative nature and power of spiritual light and illumination. I hope this survey has helped to affirm that universal nature and idea of spiritual light. Spiritual light is not an earthly light. It's what theologians and mystics, especially in the Eastern Christian tradition, call uncreated light. It's the light of the divine, the creator, channeled through entities that have gone through a process of spiritual purification that allows for a direct experience of God. No wonder that spiritual and religious traditions around the world identify light with holiness. And no wonder that light in the darkness is an ancient archetypal image and symbol, invariably understood as a manifestation, a sign of the sacred, of holiness, and of spiritual wisdom. From Persian Zoroastrian fire festivals to Thai Buddhist venerations of the Buddha with light, people around the world practice celebrations of light as experiences of beauty and splendor and joy. They remind us of our connection to divine source. This slide here illustrates two festivals of light, but there are many others. The 5-day-long Hindu celebration of Diwali is celebrated by lighting small oil lamps or candles. Diwali signifies the awakening of Atman, the soul or inner light, which brings peace and joy into our lives as it outshines the darkness of ignorance and evil. Hanukkah in the Jewish tradition, is an 8-day festival that celebrates the miraculous appearance of pure oil by which lights on the altar of the rededicated temple could be lit. During Hanukkah, Jews light candles on the menorah on each of the 8 evenings in affirmation of the miracle and in remembrance of God's provision. During the celebration of Christmas, we decorate trees with tinsel, candles, reflective ornaments, and things that generate or catch the light. The light that is generated is incredibly beautiful and attractive and provides hours of charm and fascination during wintertime. Evergreen trees, in particular, are wonderful emblems for surviving winter, and the idea of honoring trees is a very old one. In the Christian context, the evergreen Christmas tree symbolizes eternal life. The candles or lights on the tree represent Christ as the light of the world, and the star or angel atop the tree refer to Christ's nativity. So here's another example of a festival of light that is tied to hope and joy. Um, I know there's a lot of information here. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break, stretch, and we'll reconvene. How does that sound?
That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Victoria.
Okay.
We'll take a 5-minute break, friends. So it's 4:30. Let's come back at 4:35.
So it's going good. I feel pretty good. Mm.
All right, friends. Thank you for the little break, Victoria. That helps to kind of digest some of that information.
Right. Right.
All right.
Okay.
Well, welcome back, everybody.
And shall we resume then?
Yes,
I,
indeed.
okay. The story of how radiant light came to be represented in Renaissance paintings of the Nativity takes us to a remarkable Swedish medieval woman who lived from 1303 to 1373. Her name was Birgitta Birgisdotter. She was one of the most celebrated female visionaries and authors of the Middle Ages. Her story is largely unknown in this country, but bears comparison to the German Hildegard von Bingen. And I'll say right now, Birgitta is the patron saint of Sweden, and she is one of the patron saints of Europe. So she's very highly regarded in Europe. Birgitta was a strong minded and charismatic woman who, as you will hear, let her light shine. And in doing so, she played a significant role in enabling others to connect with the light. She was a highly spiritual person and at a young age wanted to devote herself to religious work. But her father insisted on her marrying at the age of 13. Fortunately, her husband was also devout, so the marriage turned out to be an extremely happy one. Over the course of their 18 years of marriage, they had 8 children. When Brigida was nearly 40 years old, she and her husband went on a lengthy pilgrimage together to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Not long after their return, unfortunately, her husband died. So she was finally, at mid age, free to commit herself to a life of prayer, meditation, austerities, and helping those in need. She affiliated herself with the Franciscans. She had been a visionary starting at the age of 7. By the time she was able to focus more intently on her spiritual life in her 40s, Brigida began to have visions with increasing frequency. And she felt that the mystical revelations that she received gave her a role as a representative of the divine. And so she went to many lengths to fight for the causes she felt the divine was communicating through her. It was difficult for her to gain support as a woman in the 14th century. And so, in order to be taken seriously, she wrote down her visions and studied as many religious books as she could. Her decision to write down her visions in 4 volumes titled Revelations resulted in the longest lasting effect of Brigida's work. Her attributes. Now, attributes are images that symbolically identify an individual in art. especially sacred art. Her attributes are unsurprisingly a book and a quill for writing, along with her pilgrim's hat you see over here on the pole, and bag, and her, well, it's not a pole, it's her pilgrim staff. There you go. This little painting offers a graphic representation of how Brigida came into contact with spiritual illumination, received visions and celestial messages, and then shared that experience with the world. Gold leaf covers the halos. It radiates from Christ and Mary in a starry heaven and fills Brigida's world as she passes on the messages she receives. I find it really interesting that Brigida, in her revelations, describes her own role as that of being, and I quote, a channel. The founder of Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky, likewise recorded the secret doctrine that was dictated to her by a group of higher beings, a spiritual hierarchy. So you start to see the parallels here. And like Blavatsky, Brigida understood that the visions weren't given to her merely for her own sake. Brigida felt she had a responsibility, a task to fulfill by passing them on and proclaiming the prophetic messages she received to the world in order to instruct and serve in the salvation of humanity. Brigida is sometimes called the mystic of the North. Well, what does mystic mean? Essentially, it means having a direct and also transformative experience of the sacred, unmediated by conventional religious rituals, by intermediaries like priests or ministers, or by scripture. It's direct experience. And Brigida had personal access to the divine. Jesus and Mary reportedly appeared to her in visions that totaled about 700 by the end of her life. And those experiences fueled her. They were not the result of book learning or hearsay. They were the product of her own witnessing and knowing rather than thinking. It's wonderful that Brigida trusted her mystical experiences enough to share them with others rather than hide them. And I think it's a lesson for us all. She trusted her lived experience, not an impersonal or abstract philosophy. Brigida had many worldly ambitions, so she fearlessly combined mysticism and politics. She broke conventional limits about the ability of women to act in public, especially widows, which she was, and she engaged with the larger world. Despite the fact that she was a woman at a time when women weren't well respected, she fearlessly spoke truth to power, whether it be a king, a queen, an emperor, or a pope. She spoke to them all and worked tirelessly for reconciliation between the church and the secular powers in Europe. It's impressive that only 18 years after her death in 1391, Brigida was made a saint by the church. She was one of the first women who had been married and also a mother and was nevertheless considered saintly. Brigida made many pilgrimages during her life, traveling all over Europe. Her last pilgrimage was to the Holy Land, where she traveled in 1373. And that's when she experienced a vision of the Nativity. The vision recorded in her revelations was so influential in art. And we're going to get into the specifics of that in our next section of the talk, how her vision inspired Renaissance artists to explore new approaches to the representation of the Nativity. It just feels so perfect that this woman who defended the poor, prayed for love and unity, and cared deeply about justice, this light worker should be the one to channel a vision of light that remains with us today. This painting shows a common way the Nativity was depicted in the years before Brigida experienced her vision of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And it also suggests how people, in other words, viewers of nativity images, would imagine the nativity. This is how people thought of it. The influence of Byzantine art from Eastern Christianity is especially evident here. Typical of Eastern models, Mary and the swaddled baby are shown in a cave. This comes from Byzantium, this idea. And Mary reclines, disengaged from the infant lying next to her. She's recovering from childbirth. Joseph, down in the bottom left corner, sits head upon hand in the pose of a classical philosopher. Everybody's engaged in their own experience and activity. Midwives bathe the infant in the foreground. You see them with a pitcher of water in a little basin. Angels up top exclaim over the birth. Shepherds gasp in amazement. At the time this was made, the Nativity had been depicted in art for 1,000 years. But there's little connection, there's little unity in the scene. The child Jesus is at the center of the story and the painting, yet he's curiously isolated. The curious ox and donkey that look on from behind give the child the most attention. Brigida's revelations were widely read, and her vision of the Nativity was very inspiring for visual artists. Here was a story that had coherence and was straight from the mouth of the Virgin Mary. You can see the difference in this painting, created soon after Brigida's vision of the Nativity. I'm going to tell you about the vision. It happened in Bethlehem on Brigida's last pilgrimage to the Holy Land. She was nearly 70 years old and in the last year of her life. And she received the vision when she was standing in the grotto under the Church of the Nativity. What she heard was narrated to her by the Virgin Mary. The scene that she beheld occurred at nighttime. Look at the upper area and you'll see all these tiny, beautiful little stars everywhere, golden stars. Brigida saw Mary in a gown of white, kneeling in prayer, having removed her shoes, which you see in the painting behind Mary. And she moved her shoes and her outer garments. That's what's lying on the ground on the lower left corner here. She did this as an expression of reverence about what was to occur. The birth took place miraculously, without pain, while Mary was kneeling in prayer. After the birth, Brigida witnessed the newborn infant lying naked on the ground. This is another new idea, because from the very beginning, the child was shown swaddled and wrapped up, but he's naked on the ground, and Brigida reported that he was shining and all aglow. And Mary knelt before the child and adored it with profound and immense joy. And an intense light emanated from the child and the mother, wonderfully represented here by prominent golden mandorlas. Brigida described it saying, quote, "There went out such great and ineffable light and splendor from the child that the sun could not be compared to it." It sounds like some of those earlier reports of spiritual light, doesn't it? All the attention is on the child in this painting, just as Brigida described Mary's focused engagement with her son, and even the words she spoke to him that Brigida reported are inscribed on the painting, swirling out of Mary's mouth. "Welcome, my God," she said, "and my Lord and my son." Joseph on the right crosses his chest in reverence and adoration. God the Father is above, top and center, wearing a crown, beneficently looking on from above. And he says, "This is my son." His words are vertically written below God, streaming down towards the baby Jesus. And in the starry night sky, angels sing. Brigida said their music was of miraculous sweetness and great beauty. This is an extra special painting because the artist included Brigida in the scene. She's shown in the bottom right corner, dressed in the garb of a pious widow, kneeling and prayerfully looking at the baby. So the complete scene of the revelation, the vision, is presented to the viewer. Here's one more painting from the early 15th century, still close in time to Brigida's vision and canonization. It's a small panel, it's only 9 inches tall. It was part of a horizontal strip, which is called a predella, which is located between an altar and a large altarpiece up above. It's a simple scene. Mary is no longer wearing white, but we see the persistence of um, elements from Brigida's vision. We have the night setting. We have Mary kneeling in adoration, actually focused on the child. The child's naked, and there's this supernatural radiating light. Brigida said that the emergence of the child was as if a great light had shone through Mary's body. So the very act of giving birth is described in terms of light. It was an experience of luminosity. And then back in the right corner, in the dark night outside, there's an angel awakening the shepherds in the right rear of the painting. So it's very simple, very beautiful little painting. So, with that summary of Brigida's vision and early depictions of it, let's move on and take a more meditative approach to the kind of paintings that followed in later centuries. Through the dramatic use of the night setting, this artist takes us right to the heart of the Nativity in Christmas. In the dark of a stable on a winter night, the child bathes those present in radiance. Mary gazes down in wonder as she's joined by a group of small angels on the left with shining faces. Look closely, and in the far distance, you'll see a glowing angel hovering in the night sky, announcing the child's birth. There she is, to the shepherds below who huddle by their campfire. I have to confess to you my great love of this painting. It's always intrigued me, and in many ways, it's the reason I chose to do this program. It's only 13 inches high, and it was created for private devotional use. So the scale, the very scale itself, invites you to draw near and give complete attention to the child, as do the wrapped angels and Mary. I find its beautiful simplicity very compelling. It's so tender. And along with that is a profound mystery, one that we're being invited into. So let's drill down into that. Here's a very similar painting created a couple of decades later. And the figures are somewhat more dimensional, but it shares a quiet psychological restraint and a calm contemplative atmosphere. It's a beautiful example of how artists, after they mastered realism during the 15th century, during the Renaissance, they were ready then to return to a more symbolic and mystical representations of the Nativity as described by Brigida. So nocturnal settings of the Nativity like these were very much a part of that sensibility. It really tells the story of spirit incarnating into three-dimensional space. Now notice up above in this upper right area, the angels and wonderfully rainbow colored wings are a really nice feature of this painting. The suggestion of rainbow indicates hope and new beginnings and transformation, things that the birth of the Christ child represents. In Marian theology, the Virgin Mary is considered an exemplar of humanity and what it means to be human. So here, we're meant not just to observe Mary, who reaches out to the child in this painting, but also to learn and emulate her, to identify with her. The tender portrayal of mother and child gives hope to the viewer that they too could have a deeper, more intimate relationship with the divine. This is a book illumination. It's made for a prayer book. It carries a lot of impact, even though it's only 5 inches high. Things get so distorted when we see them in books in terms of scale and on a screen, but it's important to remember how they are sized in actuality. Now, Joseph is in this painting. He's standing in the back here in the doorway, and he's holding a candle. Brigida said that although Joseph held a candle, the child's divine light totally overwhelmed the light from Joseph's earthly candle. And I think this painting does a really good job of rendering that. The child is so tiny and fragile, and yet the spiritual light he emanates is powerful enough to illuminate even the stable's rafters above. I'm always struck by the range and the clarity of this painting's colors. It's almost as if the Christ child acts like a prism, channeling light, teasing out its component colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, indigo. We're being shown how those who witness Christ, or Christ consciousness, if you will, those who witness the light are in turn illuminated themselves. They each reflect divine beauty in their own way, on their own wavelength of light. Divine blessing is passed on to them, thereby empowering them as light workers, illuminated spiritual presences who in turn are able to share the light of love and peace, healing, and wholeness with others. In Theosophy, the spectrum of colors is seen as a representation of the unity and diversity of divine light. Each of the colors, the 7 rays, represents a different aspect or vibration of universal consciousness. So if the rainbow signifies the wholeness of the spiritual realm within the manifested world, then this little scene represents the totality of those who in the present and future may be blessed by witnessing this gift of consciousness, spirit, the Christ child, however you want to hold it. As the formality of Renaissance art waned, new kinds of formulas developed for depicting the Nativity. But interest in night nativities persisted. In this painting, a kind of dramatic close-up is utilized by the artist, one that's familiar to us these days through film. The setting has completely fallen away, and we're brought very close to Mary and the child. The triangular composition, emphasized by the folds of Mary's blue veil, grounds us and brings great harmony and balance and stability in the painting. It communicates the love and protection that's being given the precious newborn. And the tenderness with which Mary holds the baby in this painting. Look at her. Her hands are wonderful. That tenderness is matched by the tenderness of her own soft body. Behind her, we've got three cherubim peering over her shoulders with interest. They, like Mary, are illuminated by divine light. In this painting, we've backed out and we can see a wider view of the stable. St. Joseph is directing shepherds. You can see them on the far upper left there through the doorway. Joseph's directing them to the manger and the newborn child. I want you to take a look at all the diagonals in this composition that direct attention to the child. We've got Joseph's arm pointing to the child. We've got this ladder-like hay feeder for the animals. We've got Mary's outstretched arms. All of these diagonals add a sense of energy and movement to the drama. They serve to lead the excited and curious shepherds to the divine child. At the same time, Mary, in all her grace, continues to hold the quiet and the stillness of the adoration. The lovely pink of her gown, representing love, her outstretched hands open to receiving, and the brightness with which she's lit by the child offer a beautiful vision of how spiritual illumination can hold, bless, and anchor us no matter what's going on in the rest of our lives. It's a brilliant painting, elegantly expressive and poetic, one that's been referred to as the perfection of dramatic night at nativity at night scenes. Over time, shepherd images were incorporated more and more into nativity paintings. Here, a group of shepherds, half dressed and wearing animal skins, which seems very realistic, look on with fascination at the Christ child. Mary looks directly out at us in this painting in an intentional and thoughtful way. She accepts our presence in this sacred moment, this sacred space, and she offers a powerful invitation, beckoning us to enter by pulling the cloth away and revealing the child. The invitation coming from her feels very intimate. She understands what it means to be human with all its limitations. And at the same time, she trusts spirit and is receptive to divine grace. A loving, self-sacrificing, and profoundly compassionate mother, she beckons us with love to join her at the intersection where spirit becomes flesh and flesh, humanity, engages deeply with spirit. Brigida witnessed in her vision shepherds visiting the Christ child, and she went beyond what the Gospel of Luke tells us about the Nativity. Brigida described the shepherds' emotional responses. She reported, when they saw him, they immediately adored him with great reverence and joy. Building upon Brigida's vision, the shepherds in Baroque art were increasingly brought out of the shadows and background of nativity paintings, playing greater and more expressive roles than they did in Renaissance art. In doing so, they open up a conceptual space for the viewer to imaginatively enter the space of the painting and explore encountering the Christ child, the embodiment of divine love. This painting was created by a master painter of night nativities. The intensely bright light from the luminous child is so strong, we get a pretty good view of the shepherds' faces, each with their individual features, each with their own individual response to the child, whether it be reverence, fascination, or wonder. Now that we're closer to the scene, if you want, consider imaginatively being in the stable and approaching the manger yourself. Use your senses to engage in this meditation. Smell the hay, the animals, the dirt on the stable's floor. Hear the mummers of the shepherds. Look towards the others already gathered and the bundle of light, be it Christ consciousness, spiritual consciousness, or whatever source of light that you're in touch with. Experience its miraculous luminosity. It's just come into this world. It's just been born. How does it feel to be so close to that source of illumination? So let's take a couple of minutes just to explore that space and be among those looking onto the child. I hope that this is an interesting experience for you. It's something that you can do with all kinds of images, and something I'm very, very interested in is meditating and entering into sacred scenes imaginatively. Of another painting. Uh, this is a much more recent painting. It's from 1895. Um, we've got the night sky behind, and the baby is still glowing after all these years. Let's do a little more experimentation with meditation in this painting. Look carefully at it and take it in as though you were going to describe it to a friend. Notice Mary's position, her arms where they rest, her lap, the baby, the setting, the night, the radiant light. And this time, if you're comfortable, try imagining yourself as Mary, seated, bent over the baby that you're holding. You look at it as the source of light looks at you, and trust and love are present. The baby, the light, is yours to embrace and to nurture in the world. It represents whatever source of spiritual illumination is meaningful to you in your life. Is there anything you want to say to it? Is there something it says to you? So hold this experience as a prayer, welcoming the light of spiritual illumination in your life, holding the light in your arms, caring for it with love. Let's take some more time for that. Just being that close to the light, you can almost breathe the light in and out, can't you? If you ever feel separated from light, remember taking the role of Mary in this beautiful little scene and holding illumination in your arms and the messages you gave each other. And as you remember that, you might want to light a candle. And with that, I'm going to conclude. There are so many opportunities to experience and reflect on the magic and beauty of lights during this time of year, from icy streets and twinkling outdoor displays to sparkling Christmas trees and flickering candles. May they be opportunities for you to reflect on spiritual illumination, and may your soul be lifted and your life filled with the light of spiritual illumination, the light of love and kindness and compassion for yourself and for others wherever you go, whatever you do. In the footsteps of Saint Birgitta of Sweden, may you embrace your unique gifts and abilities to bring healing and light to the world around you. Being a light worker, radiating light at your own special frequency, channeling and transmitting the light of positivity and inspiration in ways only you can. I wish you the blessings of the season and especially preciousness of the light, appreciating it in this, the darkest time of the year.